license and registration, he can sense your aggravation.
On the head of the fallen angel.
When the world is muttering under the floorboards, stomp even louder.
Time.
Let them know you are alive today.
Or unhum.
Did you know that your hands came with a ripple effect?
Whisper tones unraveling like silk.
Blood, sweat, and tears win by any means poetry.
Sway, look at me. Is a piece of the pie too good for me?
Some may call it rock the mic. We call it poetry.
And where to from here? This place, which has grown upon me, at once holding me upright and holding me prisoner. It seems her company alone is all that I have mastered. The dawn shimmers in the distance, a new day held at bay, not quite yet awakened, nor embraced by my soul. I could not hold it off long enough to dream sufficiently. But then again, dreams do shift. Begin again is the answer, always, for each cycle is but repeat. And only when built upon the ladder are we moved to higher ground. So with a parting glance at yesterday, I rise, beckoning tomorrow to be kind, searching horizons for songs yet sound, welcoming as best I can the dawn. Hello, welcome to Sojourn with Words. I'm your host, Sistah Joy, and today we are thrilled to have a fellow poet laureate as my guest. I'm speaking of Rich Follett, who is a middle school theater arts teacher. And before we go any further, Rich, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, let's let the folks know a little bit about you before we actually begin the interview of our segment. Rich Follett is, as I said, a middle school theater arts teacher who has been writing poems and songs for more than 50 years. Whoa. He was born and raised on Long Island, New York, and moved after college to Virginia, where he has mostly remained. Rich is the poet laureate of Strasburg, Virginia. His poems have been featured in numerous online and print journals, including Blaze Vox, the Montucky Review, the Willows Wept Review, and Counter Example Poetics, for which he is a featured artist. Now, his most recent volume, Photo Coup, is available through Nightwing Publications. There are also 3 volumes of poetry, Responsorials with Constance Stadler, Silence Inhabited, and also Human, etc. And they are all available through Neopoesis Press. So at least we know how to find his works, but today we don't have to find him at all. Rich, thank you so much for joining us. And if we talk about Rich Follett, we talk about a very multi-gifted individual. But we're going to primarily talk about the writing. We'll talk about maybe a little singing later, a little other things later. But when you talk about your writing, why do you write? What brings you to writing most?
I was raised with an incredible love of words and language by my mother, who was a career English teacher for 36 years.
There you go.
And she was a remarkable, loving woman, but her particular way of showing love, at least to me, was to sit late at night in her armchair in the corner of the living room and pick a word, and I would be on the couch across the room, and she would light a cigarette, because back those days everybody was a smoker, and it would be total blackness, and she would pick this word, and we would spend the better part of an hour each night before we both went to bed discussing all of the various forms and applications and uses of this particular word, and I looked forward to that time so much. And that was where it all started. I just learned to love words for their beauty and their power to express and their shades of meaning. And what a gift that was that she gave. It's lasted me all my life.
Absolutely, you're right. And as those of us who love words understand, there's absolutely nothing like delving into the nuances, the etymology, the thing that makes word choice critical in poetry, and even more so than other genres. Poetry, every poem, every line of every poem hinges on word selection. Talk to me about the qualities that you look for when you're reading and when you're crafting, when you're writing poems that you want a reader to go to a certain universe.
I want a reader of my work to be encouraged to think about the world in positive, uplifting, edifying ways, perhaps new ways. I want the reader to feel a personal connection to my work, so accessibility is important. For that reason, I will only use one of my $10 words, as my wife calls them, when it's the only one I know of in the language that will express exactly what I want to say. I don't mind sending a reader running for a dictionary if the word I use is the only word that will say what I want to say correctly, either for meaning or prosody or alliteration, consonants, some effect that I'm going for, or an internal resonance or rhyme. I work very hard at crafting my poems along those lines. I work very hard at always reading my poems aloud as I'm crafting them, because I believe, perhaps because I come from an acting tradition and a theater tradition, poetry was meant to be spoken aloud. So I always check myself and speak aloud. As far as what I look for in poetry that I read, I look for passion, I look for insight, wisdom, either an inventive use of form or language, or some real agency in terms of life experience that I can relate to. I look for a poem that makes me see the world in a new way, or reminds me of something I already knew but needed to hear again, which is what good poets can do. We all are born with a set of certain truths that we carry with us from birth, and life experience reminds us of them, and I feel a good poem can do the same thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, when you have something that is a part of your life experience that many poets don't, and that is your connection to theater. And you touched on it just a few minutes ago. When, how do you feel that theater and your connection with theater affects your writing, impacts the, not just, well, you've already said that you want to hear it aloud as you're crafting. And that's interesting, because I rarely ever hear my poetry until I'm at least finished with the first draft. So I'm hearing it in my mind, and that's a different approach than you have. So theater, because I would imagine the training that is necessary to bring words alive on stage. Well, you tell me, how is it that you feel the theater has impacted your poetry?
I think, Joy, the biggest impact is the use of hitting the operatives, finding the words that convey meaning and either help to convey a narrative or elicit an emotional response. These are called operatives, these words. They're the ones that need to be emphasized, and their placement is critical when delivering script to an audience. For instance, you can say, let's eat, Grandpa, or you can say, let's eat, Grandpa. And where you put the emphasis changes the meaning entirely.
Totally.
And this is something this is something that we attempt to do on paper with punctuation.
Yes.
But punctuation is not our only tool for that. We can write with an inflection.
Yes.
We can write with an intent. And that, I think, is where my training in the theater gives me a little bit of an advantage in terms of perhaps crafting my poems and interpreting them in ways that others might not be able to verbally.
Okay.
And I really do play upon that, not because I believe it's superior, but because it's my tradition. It's what I came from. So for me, it's an advantage because it's what I know. For you, it might be a curiosity, but it's at least a curiosity worth considering.
And it's so very, on point. I totally get it. We sometimes struggle with punctuation to try to make it such that we as the writer know how we want to present the poem, but we are writing for other readers. So that whole nuance of, placement, line breaks, punctuation, all of those things, and of course, word choice. So that when we talk about techniques, are there certain poets whose techniques you not only admired, but who have inspired you to craft your works in a certain manner?
There's brilliance all around us in past generations, in this generation, and there's so many different kinds of brilliance. I feel very privileged to be acquainted with many and to be able to borrow concepts as needed from the ones I'm familiar with. I particularly admire the work of Naomi Shihab Nye. She has some of the best line breaks in the business.
Tell us who she is.
I became aware of her through the National Endowment for the Arts. She is a poet teacher out of Texas, Naomi Shihab Nye. She writes incredibly accessible and speak-worthy poetry. And she also encourages her students. She's a college professor. And she has a wonderful way of punctuating her poems and using white space. To me, it evokes perhaps Emily Dickinson or E.E. Cummings, who I think were masters of alternative punctuation and capitalization and white space long before it became popular to do so. I just find her poetry to be always edifying, always creatively expressed, but always accessible. And I turn to her works over and over again for affirmation and inspiration and to get myself out of some binds. I sort of do, what would Naomi do?
Okay. What a wonderful legacy to know that. Yeah. Okay. Now, what are your goals as a poet? Clearly, you've reached a pinnacle that many poets do not, and many poets do not aspire to become a poet laureate. However, that is already something that you've accomplished. But what are your goals from this point?
Well, in order to answer that question, I need to storytell a tiny bit.
Okay.
Yeah, if ever you have talked to an accidental poet, I am he. I went to a workshop. Well, go back further. I took a poetry class in college. I was told I had no talent and summarily dismissed, and I didn't write again for 30 years. I just didn't write at all, except for my music, my songs. And then my wife encouraged me to go to a poetry workshop. And it was in our next town, which was really unusual. I live in the Shenandoah Valley, and there's not a lot of poetry life here. There wasn't at that time. So I went, and I just ended up getting caught up in this workshop. And the instructor, Constance Stadler, whose name you know from my responsorials book, asked me if I would collaborate on a book project with her, one that she already had a contract for. So I just stepped into that, and we collaborated on this really unique book about writing from a masculine and feminine point of view on the same topics. And it was put out, and we were reading from it, and a much larger publisher, Neopoesis Press, out of Vancouver, Washington /Canada. They have an office on each side of the border. they heard us reading on Blog Talk Radio and offered us a contract for this book. And that's how I got started. I never intended in any way to do any of this. And it all sort of fell upon me. And I have grown in it and embraced it and experienced the blessing tenfold and tried to pass it on by encouraging others. As far as goals, I started without any. So I've sort of developed some along the way. My goal for 2023 was to go from being published in online journals and in print volumes to being anthologized. And at this point, which is October of 2022, I have been anthologized 9 times already this year. So I'm just really, really blessed.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations on that. Yeah.
And I think my goal at this point, I'm 62 years old, coming on 63. I hope to keep writing for another 30 years. I'd like to leave behind a body of work that speaks positively and in an edifying way to the human condition and helps us all remember the ways in which we are joined by our humanity. Sometimes I have a hard time being taken seriously as a poet because I'm not very dark. I write about positivity. I write about the human condition in uplifting ways. And sometimes it's hard to be taken seriously as an artist. I guess my biggest goal would be to see that sort of shift, not only for me, but in our culture.
Well, I think as a good friend of mine who is also a writer says, a little more of the beautiful, please. That's the name of his book. And so I too believe it's necessary. You know, we can write about the heavy issues of the day, but we cannot stay there all the time. It is counterproductive to being an artist. So let's see, I'm going to ask one more question because we do want to get to hear some of your poetry. But what makes a poem or a poet stand the test of time?
I think the true measure of a poet's standing the test of time is universality. I think if a poet of any description can find a universal truth, express it in a creative way that makes people think or see in a new direction, I think we've touched upon a lasting legacy.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Well, thank you for helping us to get to know who Rich Follett is. And I want to share the opportunity for you to give us some contact information. So is there a website that our viewers can visit?
Yes, it's on the web, www.richfollett.com. 2 L's, 2 T's, richfollett.com.
Okay. And Rich, if one were to say in a nutshell, Rich Follett is the poet who blank. What's going to fill in the blank, short or long?
Wow, what a question. Good heavens.
Yeah, you gotta whittle it down. You gotta break it down.
Rich Follett is the poet who finds the poop and starts looking for the pony.
Okay. Well, now that's an answer that will definitely be long remembered. Rich, thank you. Thank you so much. It triggers all types of images, but that's what poetry is supposed to do.
That's exactly right.
That's exactly what poetry is supposed to do. Well, we are now going to hear some of this incredible poetry we've been hearing about. Rich has been, as he said, seasoning minds of young, impressionable persons on the campuses and in those that would part the pages of poetry books and those who would view from a stage theatrical performances. But he is a man of words. He is a poet laureate, and he is somebody that I'm honored to present to Sojourn with Words viewers here on CTV. So Rich, I'm going to hand it to you. Take it and let us see what it is that all this has been about.
All right. Well, I brought a few poems for you today. Every year, as it turns fall here in the Shenandoah Valley, there's always that first day when I see the first tree that's changing. And that's what this poem is about. It's called Prophecy. It is always the same. Green, 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 and then maddening how it always comes at the precise moment when you stop looking. One tree is on fire. It is always too much of life and death in one frame, always a spirit leap followed by proof of gravity. Try as we may, we can never prepare for this exquisite red, orange, yellow, gold eulogy. We are exalted and bereft in a moment, quivering foxes at once craving and dreading the baying of the hounds. For today, I will welcome this autumnal augury. I will wear it like a shawl and let it speak to me of dawn rather than sunset. For today, I will be one tree ablaze. And this one is about the summertime. I tend to take a lot of my inspiration from nature. This is called Farmer's Market. Rustic tables overfull, cucumbers, snap beans, and corn. Valley folk sample waist-high abundance on a Shenandoah Saturday in just midsummer. Already at 9:15, a burgeoning sun, squash yellow, high and heavy on the skin, penetrates the canvas candy with incessant stultifying fingers, provoking indolent tomatoes. Pots of heat-tempered blooms, marigolds, zinnias, salvia, rue, petunias, begonias, and daisies line serpentine aisles, their daydreams fecund with rich dark loam in the merciful cool of a gardener's trowel. I am here to lull the fretful, wilting throng, moist fingers coaxing languid arpeggios from heat-struck guitar to lift sun-blazoned baritone airs above the shimmering haze. Today, while the blossoms still cling to the vine. I don't always write in verse. Sometimes free verse. Sometimes I return to traditional forms. And this is a recent sonnet. It's called Sonnet 1, written for my wife. From time to time, 'tis human to reflect on years gone by, and which we might relive. Sweet reminiscence, pure and circumspect, entreats of time what time will never give. But when I contemplate the years we've shared, there's not one treasured hour I would repeat. Each moment is a perfect jewel most rare, without which life would never be replete. Imagined riches gained by cheating age would pale compared to those, our golden years. Our loving book embossed on every page with wrinkles, silvered hair, and conquered fears. Seen thus, remembered youth a folly seems. Tomorrows spent with you are all my dreams. We still good, Joy? Got time for one more? How do we stand?
We're good. Keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. This one has an epigram. It has an Emily Bronte quote as its epigram. It was not the thorn bending to the honeysuckles, but the honeysuckles embracing the thorn. And this is called What Singing Really Is. And it's from an upcoming volume where Constance Stadler and I revisited the idea of tandem writing, each writing from our own perspective on key quotes. So this is called What Singing Really Is. 10 years old, in my grandmother's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, she was hymn singing over her prototype wearing mixer. Her voice was not unlike glass marbles rolling down concrete steps. At the precise apex of her raucous devotion, she paused to take a breath, allowing the mixer to rest for the merest of moments, just long enough for me in childish treble to utter one brutal question. Grandmother, why do you always sing when you know everyone wants you to stop? Silence followed. I watched her deflate slightly, shoulders sagging under faded house dress. Then she set down the mixer as if it were a wounded bird, and she turned, embraced me, folding me to her gingham-clad bosom until I was faint from oxygen deprivation, pinched my childish apple cheek ever so gently with the hermetic precision only grandmothers can muster, looked deep into my beer bottle brown eyes, so like my mother's, and said, "Lammy, Lammy. When the good Lord said make a joyful noise, he didn't specify a key." That day, I understood for the first time what singing really is.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much. Those were fabulous poems. And for those who might have joined us as we had already gotten into the poetry set, you're listening to the poetry, the wonderful, the beautiful, the enriching poetry of Rich Follett. And Rich, I'm telling you, your poetry was supposed to be presented in the background that you have, that has been provided. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much. I have to say that you've inspired me to pull up a poem that I'd like to share on the heels of what you have now shared. And this poem is titled Autumn Winds. Autumn Winds, to close us out. Leaves frantically flapping, not wafting on a lofty breeze, but desperately clinging, literally holding on for dear life. The morning winds are harsh. Their task to strip bare once lush green foliage where birds once danced amid dressed branches, sought shelter to nurse new life. Even the most proud of trees is humbled. The winds do their job well. They come, faithful as clockwork, stake their claim, remind us that as with all cycles, that which was once so radiant, captivating heart and eye, that which was once filled with promise of eternal vigor, must also arrive at its natural ebb. So once again, the duet is danced, the swan song is sung, and the bedecked burglar in his glorious coat of crimson and gold foretells the final ring of nature's bell. Thank you for inspiring me to pull that up, even as you were sharing your work, your beautiful work. Thank you so much for being a guest here on Sojourn with Words. I'm Sistah Joy, your host. I look forward to hearing what you thought about today's episode and what you'd like to hear and see on future episodes of Sojourn with Words, where we strive to present the best, the quality, those who know what to do with this instrument, such as Rich Follett, who represents well down there in Strasburg, Virginia, and on stages, I'm sure, beyond that locale. So we're happy to have you. And Rich, please stay in touch and let us know when your books come out, and we'll be happy to post that information on our Sojourn with Words Facebook page. We want to know when things are happening with our family members. And of course, because you've been now a guest on Sojourn with Words, you're part of the family. So welcome, and don't be a stranger.
Thank you so much, Joy. What an honor.
Well, that closes out the episode. We look forward to hearing more poetry from other poets. Send me your words. You can reach me at Sistah Joy, that's SISTAHJOY, at PGAHC.org. That's Prince George's Arts and Humanities Council.org. We'd love to hear from you. And hey, remember, pick up that pen and keep writing.